Hello, my name's Amanda. Welcome to my channel. I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to talk about Kundalini Rising, Kundalini Activation, and I'm going to share a little bit of an update on my last 7 years of dealing with the turbulent waves of the Kundalini energy. And if you aren't sure what that is, Kundalini energy is a latent life force energy that lives usually sleeping at the bottom of our spine, maybe kind of like in our pelvic area. And then based on, surprises in life like trauma, psychedelic plant medicine, maybe just like a lot of spiritual practice, this energy decides to activate and move around the body. And we could be more or less prepared for that. And many of us in the West, in the modern world, are less prepared for it. So we have some like very turbulent times with the energy. If your spiritual awakening hasn't come with like a bang of Kundalini energy, that just means it's a kind of like a different way. We're all going to the same place, and everything I talk about in this video, it doesn't matter if it's like a Kundalini rising, sudden, forceful activation, or if it's like a slow burn. We're all going to the same place. So just a little update on my symptoms or like the happenings in my life. Some of the things have been suspension of periods and digestive slowing, sometimes bloating, because the pushing up energy in the body kind of interferes with the downward pushing of digestion or menstruation. That can happen. Spontaneous kriyas at night, jerking in the night, insomnia, restless leg type of issues, although not just in a leg, sometimes like in an arm or in one foot. Movement in my heart causing a ton of pressure and sometimes a lot of burping. Whooshes of energy that move up the body and then hit the inside of the top of my skull, creating a headache. And sometimes they've caused just a lot of swelling in my eyes. Sometimes, one time I had a 3-day migraine, and I never got migraines. Twice I burst out in a sinus infection, and also twice like it turned into an ear infection. A lot of nervous energy, just like I'm not a nervous person, but a lot of like just heightened nerve energy where I could feel other people's energy. Sometimes I could sense what they were about to do, just like overwhelming in that way. Being in groups of people have been very overstimulating since this started. Sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sounds, sometimes spine sensitivity, like going over a bump in a car will cause my whole spine to hurt, and then the next day I'll be totally back to normal. Craving solitude for long periods of time, many hermit phases, upward pressure that will stop at a certain chakra, and then there'll be a kind of like a pushing feeling, a pressure, a big uncomfortable sensation at that chakra. Sometimes feeling like someone is electrically zapping one of those chakras. That especially happens in my root chakra. And then also, what has probably been the most challenging out of everything has been huge surges of panic. Huge surges of panic that is not related to what's going on in my life or my environment, which makes it even more strange, especially at the beginning. And that feeling like I'm about to die, like someone is chasing me for my life, a sense of impending doom. Like everything's over, everything's about to fall apart when everything's actually kind of orderly around me. And this is really common one. I hear this a lot from people. So whether you're kind of like in like a slow building spiritual awakening or you've had a sudden Kundalini activation, this can be big. And for me, it would always happen first thing when I would wake up in the morning, or sometimes in the middle of the night. I'd come awake. I almost always wake up about 2 or 3 a.m., but sometimes it's come with just a lot of force. And it's caused me to really question so much and have like a lot of compassion for people who do struggle with anxiety throughout their life, because I didn't really understand before. This for me would kind of go beyond being anxious about like giving a speech or meeting a new person. This is like, it just takes over the whole body. So yeah, those have been some of my things. And the cool thing is, even though the surges kind of come and go, especially in night times, and they also are a little bit more intense around my menstrual cycle, I have finally, it took long enough, started to really embrace the Kundalini energy. No matter how much discomfort and chaos is caused in my life, start to really embrace it and see it as something that is here to really help save me from my old self. And after all the trouble and the interference of my old life that it has caused, it's taken me a long time to accept that this was actually a gift, that this is a gift. And I get it if you don't feel like this disruption to your life is a gift. I don't think that anyone should be expected to see it like that. But as I kind of got to the tipping point and realized that it was here to help me, that is actually when things started to become a lot more smooth and seamless. What I have learned by experience and practice is that the disruptions that come into our life when we have this kind of stuff going on in our body, we can't live the same life as we used to live. I mean, I used to work full-time and overtime as a paramedic. I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. I've worked most of my life. Before that, I worked in addictions and mental health housing for a few years. I worked in halfway house for teen girls for a few years. Almost all my jobs involved like crisis response to some level or another. It was very dynamic, problem solving on your toes. I just loved it. And I always really loved the teams of people that I worked with, as well as the clients, patients. But when this all started up 7 years ago, I realized, too late, but I realized that I couldn't work night shifts anymore. I couldn't work with the loud sirens and like the sudden calls that would come in. And it had just become too hard on my body. I was getting chronic health problems. I was developing insomnia, and I clung to my identity as an ambulance paramedic. That's always what I'd done. And I just, for whatever reason, I didn't realize it, but I really clung to that as like, this is my life path. This is my purpose in life. And I took because I wasn't sure what was going on with my health, I took a break. It's like a 3-month stress leave. I lived in my van for the summer with my dogs and thought, okay, I'll get my sleep back to normal, and then I'll be feeling peaceful by the end of this 3 months. I'll go back to work. And then what started to happen in the weeks leading up to my return to work was I started getting a lot of Kundalini surges of panic and anxiety. And my brain, my personality, and my ego wanted to go back to work and kind of get in that same groove I had been in, what I felt comfortable with and in control of. And yet my soul was like, no. I went back to work anyway, and I felt so many Kundalini surges and so much discomfort being there that I did end up having to quit. Over the years, now kind of in retrospect, I can admit that a lot of times the most difficult and painful and uncomfortable symptoms and Kundalini surges that were happening in my body were directly related to a decision that I was not willing to make, a crossroads that I was procrastinating, or I had been at a crossroads and I took the comfortable, easy way out instead of the right way for my soul. And it was almost like the Kundalini was rebelling by giving me surges of discomfort and symptoms, and sometimes so-called chronic health problems, until I rearranged myself and made the right decision. Another thing was, I've been traveling a lot in these last 7 years. And at first it was going really smoothly and I loved it, and I would just pick up and go somewhere new. And then it started to become overwhelming. Like I wanted to go somewhere new. I had like a plan of where I wanted to go. But then every time I thought about traveling and started to make the plans of the next place that I was going, I would start getting Kundalini surges to the point where I wasn't even comfortable getting on a plane. as well as having like flare-ups of endometriosis and other stuff. Just being in a state where I wanted to cocoon and not move around. And so the adventurer in me that always wanted something dynamic and new to be going on in order to be stimulated, not so different than the jobs I was working, there was like a halt to that. There was like, you are, if you look at the whole life of yourself, Amanda, you have been unbalanced with stillness. You've been always busy doing something and always thrill seeking in one way or another. And nature seeks to balance. And so we are going to make it so uncomfortable for you so that you learn stillness and you learn slowness, because you're not consciously choosing that and you're not carving out parts of your life for that stillness. And so the the Kundalini School of Hard Knocks has been, one lesson for me ongoingly has been choosing long periods of stillness. And I'm not talking about just staying in one place for a long time. I'm talking about sometimes weeks at a time of barely leaving this room or another room that I've been living in. I would sometimes get this sensation of like, I'd get up in the morning, I'd do a little bit of work, go for a walk or whatever, and then by 11 a.m. feel like a weighted blanket was like being dropped on me slowly. Like I couldn't keep my eyes open. I didn't have, the gravity was taking over. And then I would lie in my bed and be kind of somewhere between sleeping and meditating, which those are two very different things, but it would kind of like alternate back and forth. And I would also feel often like a very blissful buzz in my body. And then like 3 or 4 hours would go by and I would wake up so rejuvenated. I'd feel amazing, not manic and hyper, just so rejuvenated. Like all my cells had been like coated with this glowing, rejuvenating Kundalini energy. And I would have the most amazing evening after. But then sometimes like this would kind of go on and off with this weighted blanket for weeks at a time. And I'd realize like, wow, a month has passed and I've hardly seen another human being. And so the stillness has been often forced on me in this process. And then when I'm in the stillness, the Kundalini surges totally slow down because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing what's actually in alignment. So I don't have to be pressed any harder. If I really would go back in time and I could tell my previous self a little bit of advice, I would say, way to go on quickly learning to surrender to the feelings and sensations in your body. I was good at that. I had learned from plant medicine ceremony that when really overwhelming feelings and sensations take over the body temporarily, that we can surrender and we can lean into them and we can feel them as fully as possible because they're temporary and we'll become resilient as a result. So that had been a practice that I'd been working on, I'm still working on, but I've been always quite committed to that aspect of surrender. However, something that's not talked about so much in the videos and teachings on Kundalini is actually surrendering to what it's asking you to do in your day-to-day life, what changes are being required of you in your physical life. Sometimes we feel like we don't have the guidance that we need. Like, what am I supposed to do next with my life? You know, I feel lost. I don't feel like spirit is guiding me. And that's normal. But when we are having a lot of this trouble going on in our body, nowadays, what I ask myself is, what crossroads am I at? What part of my lifestyle, big or small, am I holding on to because I think that's who I am, that's the way that I've always done this, or this is the way society does this. And yet the Kundalini is fighting against that part of my life. You know, I've left jobs because I was too uncomfortable. The energy was like so massive doing that job or doing the amount of work at that job. And then when I stepped away, I'd feel amazing. Okay, so stepping away obviously was going to cause financial changes for the most part, but I had to eventually say yes and do that anyway. Choosing where I'm going to live. I'm a city girl. I grew up outside of Toronto and I'd always be downtown. I love looking at like the arts and culture things and the people. I can't live in a city anymore and I miss that sometimes. It's too overstimulating for me, and there's not enough nature connection. And so in all my travels, I've always kind of like chosen cities, felt terrible, fought it, tried to like, you know, get through all my Kundalini symptoms while living in the city, and then eventually would kind of relocate myself to somewhere in the country and feel a lot better. And it was like who I thought I was and what I thought I needed was actually not what my soul wanted and needed for me. Job, physical location, people who I lived with. Traveling, you sometimes have roommates or you're living with other people, sometimes Airbnb hosts, and not everybody is an easy person to live with because you're so oversensitive with the Kundalini experience that either you have to live alone or with people that have give you your space. And so I kept finding myself over and over living with people that were not the right match for me in the amount of sensitivity that I had. And instead of acknowledging that I had made a poor decision and gone ahead and looked for a new place to live, I would just stick it out and think, I've just got to be a little bit more strong. I've got to be a little bit more strong and not be so sensitive. And there's something wrong with me for being so sensitive. And then things would just get worse. The Kundalini symptoms would get worse. And then the situations and the interactions with who I was living with would also get worse. Foods. Sometimes I would just follow my regular eating plan. I would say I'm like a 99% vegetarian. I don't eat too much junk food. I love chocolate. I've kind of like been eating like that for most of my adult life. And then sometimes I would completely lose my appetite, but I would eat anyway because I'm used to eating regular meals. And I would get huge digestive upsets because there was already so much energy, extra than normal energy moving through my body due to the Kundalini. I didn't need calories. I mean, we all need to eat, we all need calories, but on certain days, those were days that the body was way more comfortable fasting and just drinking fluids. But I would eat anyway, and then my symptoms would start up. And so now it doesn't happen too often, but now I can kind of like feel into that. If I'm not hungry, I drink fluids, I skip a meal, I fast, I do these kinds of things because I realize the body is too busy working through something with the Kundalini energy and does not want to spend any extra energy on my digestion. And plus the prana and the energy that's moving through, like calories are not really that required. And of course fasting is always a good thing. Changing my diet. I'm not somebody who's like wanting to eat meat. That's not, as a vegetarian, it's not. But I would get sometimes really ungrounded and really flighty and have a hard time focusing on conversations and get so overwhelmed and overstimulated in social groups that I realize I need to eat a little bit of chicken. I need to eat a little bit of fish. And that went against, my whole liking to be a vegetarian, but I would feel grounded right away. I'd feel way more present, way more in the body, less flighty. And so kind of like submitting to like what the Kundalini is telling you. If you're somebody who's got a lot of surges going on, especially panic surges, being curious about what needs to be changed, what needs to change in your life. And not just little things like diet, but job, location, housing situation. What do you need to say no to? And what conversations need to be had? I had a couple of situations where I really needed to speak my truth because the other person, usually someone who I loved and was close to, was projecting and pushing how they wanted me to be, basically how I used to be when I was a little bit more of a people pleaser. They wanted that version of me back, and they were not going to be friendly and kind to the version of me that had my own sphere, my own space, my own lines of definition of who I was and what was okay with me. And just wanting to be yourself and have your own lines of definition without harming anyone else, that can be triggering for people who are around us, especially if we have a history of people pleasing. So having to have some pretty sticky conversations and letting that other person know it's not going to work for me for you to project the old me from like when I was a teenager and how I pleased you back then, I'm not going to be doing that ever again. No matter what you say or do, I'm not going to be able to show up like that, because that is a slap in the face of my higher self. Okay, and so people aren't necessarily going to understand and like that. Difficult conversations that need to be had. So if your Kundalini surges, if your discomfort, surges of panic are going on, and you know it's definitely related to your spiritual awakening, not only surrendering, breathing through, relaxing into, and leaning into the feelings and sensations, but also making a choice at whatever crossroads happens to be in front of you. What you know is no longer in alignment, but it's something that's just kind of like lingering from the past. Maybe your housing situation, your job was perfect for you 5 years ago, but now it's not. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It just means you've changed so much since 5 years ago that, it's like being in grade 5 and you want to still keep living like you're in grade 1. Well, the Kundalini is an evolutionary energy to make you more of who you really are, and to wake up more of your soul so that more of the light of God can live in you. So it's not going to let you go back to grade 1. It's like going to the grade 1 class and the teacher's at the door and she's like, what are you doing here? You've completed this. There's nothing left for you here. Going to grade 1 would be going backwards. And so that's why it can be so much panic. Like if you look at people who have done the same thing mostly every day of their life, they've had the same job for 30, 40 years. They lived in the same town. They do problem solving pretty much the same way. They never take any risks or step out of their comfort zone, and they're not on a spiritual path. Well, maybe they don't live with a lot of anxiety because they're not taking any risks. They're not trying anything new. So the fact that you even have anxiety and surges of panic mean that you are on an evolutionary path, and you are meeting new challenges. You are being changed and forced from your inner surges and from like the universe orchestrating stuff around you to step into new spheres. Well, no matter who you are, that's going to cause you to have to feel panic and find courage. And if your spiritual awakening is like going like from phase to phase, situation to situation very rapidly, then it would make sense that you're having a lot of panic on and off for a long period of time, because things are changing very quickly. And from a more esoteric point of view, because this is physical in the physical body, we're getting the symptoms and sensations, but it's also happening in your etheric body, and your etheric body is kind of like the invisible sheath, the invisible layer that's next closest to your physical body, and that etheric body is informing the physical body. So a lot of the happenings of energy are going on in this etheric body that's kind of like through you and around you and part of you, and then it's triggering you having like a physical reaction and sensation. In some traditions, it's called the inner fire. The arousal and the awakening of the inner fire. That's what's going on in the etheric body. So like an etheric fire in your etheric body that's just firing all this stuff up. It's very magnetic. It's got a lot of energy. So it's interacting with the energies that are around you, possibly triggering other people in ways that you've never triggered other people, maybe attracting people to you in ways that you've never had them attract to you, whether it's like romantic, or whether it's sexual, or whether it's just platonic, depending on what's going on. So think of it as like the arousal of the inner fire. And sometimes the fear of ignorant people around us can slow our growth. Sometimes the fear of ignorant people around us can slow our growth. There's a lot of people who have a fear of the unknowable, including us on the spiritual path, but especially people who haven't even stepped on to the spiritual path. They don't want to talk about anything that's frightening or the unknown. They want their predictable life. And so do we. We want a predictable life, but spirit has come and like interfered with that. So we're on this path of having to know some of the unknowable. But the fear of ignorant people around us is a real thing. Because what you're doing, what you're experiencing, and what you're changing is some kind of a contrast to what they're doing and what they've chosen. And Lynn Andrews, who I love so much, she said that you cannot fight the ignorance of people. They have more power over you in the physical world. You are at war against ignorance, and you will learn to not be afraid. There is a pantheon of light beings around you. So if you are experiencing panic surges that don't seem to be related to like public speaking or starting a new job, they're very spiritual in nature, keep working with those panic surges and try different resources that call to you. What works for me is going to be different than what works for you. I've found that, especially when I wake up first thing in the morning with a panic surge or in the middle of the night, I have done shaking, TRE exercises, breathing techniques. Those things seem to work to kind of get through the panic surge, to move through it, but don't exactly get to the root of it. What I have found of getting to the root of it takes a little bit more commitment. And for me, it's been a combination of working with people who are farther down the road than I am, and just like being recognized and witnessed and seen for the difficult situation I'm in by someone who knows exactly how difficult it is, and hearing and seeing where they've gotten to because they've put one foot in front of the other, and then me having more faith in myself, knowing that if they can do it, I can do it. So reaching out for help and support. And then also learning, and this is not something that I could do at the beginning, and it's taken a long time and a lot of little practices, but learning to merge as much as possible with what's going on. So like, for example, if I feel a panic surge come and I know it's Kundalini energy, instead of trying to distract myself away, I will focus on it, feel it fully, and focus on nothing else. I'll breathe into it. I'll send oxygen and prana to the part of my body that's like really uncomfortably activated. I will say, oh, this feels like it's a 9 out of 10. I'm in a 9 out of 10 panic surge. Okay, and I'm going to check in with myself in 30 seconds and see if it's still a 9 out of 10. And just kind of like really paying attention to the quality of it. But I imagine that sensation, usually it's from the past, it's from the childhood. We've all had like fears in our childhood that got stuffed in the subconscious. They're all coming up now. I'm imagining my body to be a body of light, the light of God all through me. And this little activation of electrical panic energy is here because it needs to merge with the light. It needs to be absorbed into the light. It needs to fizzle and play itself out in the light. And the light being, I am the parent to the child who experienced this. And that little child's energy is still, their fear energy is still hiding in my body. And it's just wanting to be absorbed. It's just wanting to be felt, absorbed, recycled, moved through. And I am now mature enough. This is happening because you're mature enough. You're developed enough to be able to process this stuff, not because you're weak. So practicing merging with it. And when I first started doing this, I couldn't do it for long. It just got too much, and then I would give up. But at least I would try. And then I could do it for longer and longer. Until now, if I get a surge, I can be with it and I can merge with it. I can even amplify it. I'm like, come on, give me your 101% because I'm 101% here for you. And then it fizzles out. And the times where I now merge with it and I ride it out and I feel it like, even if it wants to be a 10 out of 10, I'm with it. I'm being with it. I feel amazing after. I feel amazing the next day. And things that normally are overwhelming for me are less overwhelming. I have so much more patience for things that usually trigger me. So if you can work your way up very gently and very patiently by fully feeling, merging with these sensations, then that can potentially be a path for you through this. To just imagine this dance of old energy and the light of God, dancing, 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 being present for it all in the body, and focusing on nothing but that during the wave. So that is a way that we can alchemize physically. And yeah, all this growth is costly. It's costly to your old self. It's costly to the version of you that was projected on you from your family and your community. You know, if you were born into a belief system or a fake way of being in society, needing to look a certain way, or else, like you weren't accepted, a lot of us are unconsciously still living out pieces of that so that we can feel okay, we can feel valuable and maybe connected to our family. But all growth is costly, and it involves leaving behind this old way of being in the world and disembedding that mindset and embedding something new that your soul is trying to reveal itself. It's like knocking on your door through these power surges. And if you stick with it and you believe that this is for you, and you can let these other things fall away and be okay with like a void period of time, dropping off what was, letting go of that, being not sure of what's coming, but not fearing that darkness in the middle, that dark void in the middle, then little by little, the soul is going to reveal things that have been waiting for you. Gifts, skills, abilities, ideas, places and people that have been waiting for you your whole life, but couldn't get to you because your old self was in the way, you know. So there's a lot to look forward to. And for many of us, this process is going to be the rest of our life. So figuring out how to be okay with it and to see it as a blessing, to work with the energy and to be excited about our resources that work and the little gains and skills and abilities that come along the way is priceless. So yeah, I think that's all for this one. Keep going, keep feeling everything, and don't be afraid to make big changes. Other than that, journey well.